The hammer came down with a crack that split the afternoon air, and Zelda Kincaid felt her stomach drop as the auctioneer pointed directly at her with a grin that showed too many yellow teeth. She stood on the makeshift platform in the center of Stockton, California, her hands trembling inside the pockets of her worn calico dress, watching as men sized her up like cattle. It was August 1882, and the Sacramento Valley heat pressed down on everything with merciless weight. Sweat trickled down her spine as she tried to keep her chin high, tried to remember that this was survival, not surrender. Her father's debts had become her debts when he died 3 months ago, and the creditors had been swift and ruthless. Now she was being auctioned off under a labor contract, bound to work as a cook for whoever paid the most, going once for $200 to feed the logging camp up north. The auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the crowd that had gathered in the dusty square. Zelda's eyes swept over the faces below her. Loggers mostly, rough men with calloused hands and hard eyes, a few merchants, some ranchers, and then she saw him. He stood apart from the others, a cowboy with sun-darkened skin and black hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and his hat was pushed back just enough that she could see his face clearly. He was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, but there was something different in his gaze. Not the calculating assessment of the others. Something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, though she had never seen him before in her life. 250, called out a burly man with a thick beard, and Zelda felt her heart sink further. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his boots leaving prints in the dust. $500. The crowd went silent. $500 was more than twice what a cook's contract usually brought, more than most men in Stockton saw in half a year. The auctioneer's eyes widened with greed. 500 from the gentleman in blue. Do I hear 550? The bearded logger shook his head and stepped back, muttering under his breath. No one else spoke. The hammer came down again. Sold to Zane Irons for $500. Zelda's knees nearly gave out. She watched as the cowboy counted out the money in crisp bills that he pulled from inside his vest, handing them over to the auctioneer, who bit each one to test its authenticity. Then the man was climbing the steps to the platform, moving with a loose-limbed grace that spoke of years in the saddle. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a deep brown, almost black, with tiny lines at the corners from squinting into the sun. He held out his hand to her. "Madam, my name is Zane Irons. Let us get you down from here." His voice was low and steady, with a faint accent she could not quite place. Somewhere from further south, maybe Texas. She put her hand in his, feeling the rough warmth of his palm against hers, and let him help her down the steps. Her legs felt unsteady, and she was grateful when his hand moved to her elbow to steady her. "Where am I going?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "What camp?" He looked down at her, and something flickered across his face. "No camp." Before she could ask what he meant, he was guiding her away from the auction block, through the dispersing crowd. People stared as they passed, and Zelda felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the August sun. He led her to a hitching post where a beautiful bay gelding stood waiting, its coat gleaming with health. "Wait here just a moment," Zane said, releasing her arm. She watched as he walked back to where the auctioneer was packing up his cash box. They spoke briefly, the auctioneer handing over a folded document. The contract. Her contract. The paper that bound her to 3 years of labor that made her little more than property. Zane returned with the document in his hand. He looked at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled a match from his pocket, struck it against his boot heel, and touched the flame to the corner of the paper. Zelda gasped. What are you doing, setting you free? He held the burning contract until the flames licked close to his fingers, then dropped it to the ground and ground the ashes under his heel. You are not going to any logging camp. You are not bound to anyone. She stared at him, her mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. You just paid $500 for my contract. Yes. And now you burned it. Yes. Why? The word came out almost as a whisper. Why would you do that? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt something shift in her chest. Because no one should be bought and sold. Because I have been watching you in this town for the past week, seeing you try to find work, seeing every door close in your face because of your father's debts. Because when I saw that they were putting you up on that auction block, I knew I could not let you be taken to some camp in the mountains where no one would see what happened to you. Tears stung her eyes. She had not cried through any of this, not when her father died, not when the creditors came, not when she was told she would be auctioned. But now, faced with this stranger's unexpected kindness, she felt her composure crumbling. I do not understand, she said. You do not even know me. No, he agreed. But I would like to, if you will let me. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I have a small ranch about 10 miles north of here. Nothing fancy, but it is mine. I run cattle, do some horse breaking. I could use help with the cooking and the house if you are willing. I will pay you fair wages, same as I would pay any hand. You will have your own room, your own space. And when you have saved enough money to go wherever you want to go, I will take you there myself. Zelda looked at this man, this Zane Irons who had just burned $500 and offered her a way forward instead of a way down. Every instinct she had developed in her 22 years of life told her to be cautious, to question, to protect herself. But she was so tired of being afraid, so tired of fighting alone. Why should I trust you? She asked, needing to hear his answer. You should not, he said simply. Not yet. Trust is earned, not given, but I am asking you to take a chance. Come to the ranch for 1 week. If at any time you feel unsafe or want to leave, I will bring you back to town and give you enough money to start over somewhere else. You have my word on that. She studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint of the ulterior motives she had learned to recognize in men. But all she saw was sincerity and something else, something that looked like hope. 1 week, she said finally, and I will decide then. Relief washed over his features. That is all I ask, he gestured to his horse. Ruby here is gentle as a lamb. Have you ridden before? Not often, Zelda admitted, but I can manage. He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges. I will be right behind you the whole way. He helped her mount, his hands respectful as he guided her foot into the stirrup and steadied her as she swung into the saddle. Then he untied the reins and handed them to her, before swinging up behind her in one smooth motion. She tensed as his arms came around her to hold the reins with her, his chest warm against her back. Just relax, he said softly, his breath stirring the loose strands of hair at her temple. Ruby knows the way home. They rode out of Stockton as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the coastal mountains. Zelda tried to focus on the landscape, on the golden grass that stretched in every direction, on the oak trees that dotted the valley like dark green sentinels. But she was intensely aware of Zane behind her, of the steady rhythm of his breathing, of the way his body moved with the horse's gait. She had never been this close to a man who was not her father, and it made her feel things she had no name for. After about 30 minutes of riding, he spoke. Tell me about yourself, Zelda Kincaid. What did you do before all this happened? It took her a moment to find her voice. I kept house for my father. He was a surveyor, traveled a lot for work. When he was home, I cooked for him, mended his clothes, managed what little money we had. When he was gone, I took in sewing to earn extra." She paused. "He was a good man, but he was not good with money. He borrowed from the wrong people, made promises he could not keep. When he died, they came after me for his debts." "That is not right," Zane said, and she could hear the anger in his voice. "A daughter should not inherit her father's debts." "Tell that to the law," she said bitterly, "or the men who make the laws. You are right to be angry." They rode in silence for a while. Then Zelda asked, "What about you? How did a cowboy end up with a ranch?" She felt him shift slightly behind her. "I worked cattle drives for 10 years, from Texas up to Kansas and back. Saved every penny I did not spend on supplies. 3 years ago, I bought the land from a widow whose husband died of fever. She wanted to go back east to her family, sold it to me for a fair price. It is not much, maybe 200 acres, but it has good water and decent grazing. I have about 70 head of cattle and a dozen horses." "That sounds like a lot of work for one man," Zelda observed. "It is," he admitted. "I hire day laborers during roundup and branding, but mostly I manage on my own. It gets lonely sometimes." He said the last part quietly, almost as if he had not meant to say it at all. The sun was low on the horizon when they finally reached the ranch. It sat in a small valley with a creek running through it, the water glinting gold in the dying light. The house was modest, built of weathered wood with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. A barn stood nearby, along with a smaller outbuilding that might have been a bunkhouse or storage shed. Corrals extended from the barn, and Zelda could see horses moving in the paddocks, their coats sleek and healthy. "It is beautiful," she said and meant it. "It is home," Zane replied. He dismounted first, then helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. For just a moment they stood close together, his eyes searching hers. Then he stepped back and gestured toward the house. "Let me show you around." The inside of the house was cleaner than she had expected for a bachelor's home, though it had the sparse, utilitarian feel of a place where someone lived but did not quite thrive. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a wooden table with 4 chairs near the window. A doorway led to what she assumed were the bedrooms. "You will have this room," Zane said, opening a door to reveal a small but tidy space with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the creek. "It was meant to be a guest room, though I have never had guests. There is a lock on the inside of the door. I want you to use it. I want you to feel safe here." Zelda looked at the room, at the clean quilt on the bed and the wildflowers someone had placed in a jar on the dresser. "You put flowers in here," she said, touching one of the petals gently. "I thought it might make the room more welcoming," he said, and she could hear a note of uncertainty in his voice, as if he was worried he had overstepped. "It does," she assured him. "Thank you." He nodded, looking relieved. "My room is on the other side of the house. The washroom is just there, and there is a pump in the kitchen for water. I will bring in your things." "I do not have any things," Zelda said quietly. "Everything was sold to pay the debts." Something fierce crossed his face. "Then we will get you things. Tomorrow we can ride into town and buy you some dresses, whatever you need. You have already spent enough money on me." "That was not spent on you," he corrected gently. "That was spent on your freedom. This is different. Everyone needs clothes and personal items. It is not charity, it is necessity. Besides, you will be earning wages. You can pay me back if it makes you feel better." She wanted to argue, but she was too tired, and truth be told, she did need things. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you." That first evening was awkward in the way that evenings are, when 2 strangers are trying to navigate a new dynamic. Zane insisted on cooking dinner himself, refusing to let her work on her first night. He made a simple meal of fried salt pork, beans, and cornbread, and they ate mostly in silence, stealing glances at each other across the table. After dinner, Zelda insisted on washing the dishes despite his protests. As she worked at the basin, she was aware of him moving around the room, banking the fire, checking the locks on the doors and windows. It was such a domestic scene, and yet it felt charged with something she could not name. "I should turn in," she said finally, drying her hands on a towel. "It has been a long day." "Of course." He stood near the fireplace, his hat in his hands. "Zelda, I want you to know that I meant what I said earlier. You are safe here. If you need anything in the night, anything at all, just call out. I am a light sleeper." "I believe you," she said, and realized with some surprise that she did. She went to her room and closed the door, turning the lock with a soft click. Then she sat on the bed and let herself shake, let herself feel everything she had been holding back all day. She had been bought and freed in the same afternoon. She had ridden pressed against a stranger's chest for miles. She was now living in the house of a man she did not know, dependent on his goodwill and his word. And yet, as she lay down on the clean sheets and pulled the quilt up to her chin, she did not feel afraid. She felt something that might have been hope. The next morning, Zelda woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving quietly in the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through her window, warm and golden. For a moment, she could not remember where she was. Then it all came back in a rush. She dressed quickly in her same worn dress, the only one she owned, and braided her blonde hair back from her face. When she emerged from her room, she found Zane at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," she admitted. It was true. She had slept deeply, dreamlessly, without the constant anxiety that had plagued her since her father's death. "I am glad." He dished eggs onto 2 plates along with thick slices of bread. "After breakfast, we can ride into town if you are up for it. Get you some supplies." They ate breakfast together, and the conversation came easier this time. He asked about her favorite foods, what she liked to cook. She asked about the ranch, about the daily rhythms of his work. They were feeling each other out, she realized, learning the shape of each other's lives. The ride back into Stockton was pleasant in the morning cool. This time, Zelda rode a gentle mare named Daisy while Zane rode Ruby. At the general store, he was true to his word, letting her pick out 3 dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, and various other necessities. The total came to more than she had expected, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I will pay you back," she insisted as they loaded the packages onto the horses. "Every penny." "You will do no such thing," he replied firmly. "These are things you need. I will not have you working for me in one dress. Now, there is one more stop I want to make." He led her to a small bookshop she had never noticed before, tucked between the blacksmith and the telegraph office. Inside, the air smelled of paper and leather. Zane gestured around the cramped space with its floor-to-ceiling shelves. "Pick out a few books, whatever you like." Zelda stared at him. "I cannot ask you to buy me books." "You did not ask. I am offering. Everyone needs something to do in the evenings besides stare at the walls." He leaned against a shelf, watching her. "Go on. I can see you want to." She did want to. She had always loved reading, but books were expensive luxuries her father could rarely afford. Slowly, she began to browse the shelves, running her fingers along the spines. She chose a novel by George Eliot, a collection of poems, and a cookbook with recipes she had never tried. When she brought them to the counter, Zane paid without comment. Walking back to the horses, loaded down with packages, Zelda felt something loosening in her chest. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "And please do not say it is just because no one should be bought and sold. I believe that is part of it, but there is something more." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I told you I watched you in town for a week before the auction. That was true. I saw you going from business to business, asking for work. I saw the way you held your head high even when they turned you away. I saw you give your last bit of bread to a stray dog that was starving in an alley. I saw strength in you and grace, and I thought." He trailed off, then started again. "I spent 10 years on cattle drives, sleeping on the ground, eating dust, and the whole time I was working toward having my own place. But when I finally got it, I realized that a place is just a place if you are living there alone. I am not saying this to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. I just want you to understand that helping you has helped me too. It has given me a purpose beyond just surviving." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes again. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything." He helped her mount Daisy, carefully securing the packages behind the saddle. "Let us just take it one day at a time." The days began to settle into a rhythm. Zelda took over the cooking and the housekeeping, and found satisfaction in bringing order and warmth to the space. She made bread from scratch, hung curtains she sewed from fabric they bought in town, planted an herb garden near the kitchen door. Zane worked the ranch, leaving early each morning to check on the cattle, mend fences, work with the horses. But he always came back for the midday meal, and they would sit together at the table and talk. They talked about everything. He told her about growing up in Texas, the son of a ranch hand who died when Zane was 16, leaving him to make his own way. She told him about her childhood in San Francisco, before her mother died of influenza and her father moved them inland for work. He told her about the cattle drives, the danger and the boredom, the strange beauty of sleeping under stars that stretched from horizon to horizon. She told him about the books she loved, the dreams she used to have of maybe teaching school someday. "You could still do that," he said one afternoon as they sat on the porch, shelling peas into a bowl. "Teach, I mean. There is a school in Stockton that is always looking for teachers." "I only finished 8 years of school myself," she pointed out. "I am not qualified." "You are smarter than half the people in this valley," he said with conviction. "And you care about learning. That is more important than any piece of paper." She smiled at him, warmed by his faith in her. "Maybe someday." A week passed, then 2. They never discussed the fact that Zelda's trial week had ended, that she could leave if she wanted. The truth was, she did not want to leave. She was happier at the ranch than she had been anywhere since her mother died. And it was not just the safety and stability, though those things mattered. It was Zane himself. The way he listened when she talked, really listened as if her words were important. The way he made her laugh with his dry observations about the horses' personalities. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression so tender it made her heart ache. She knew she was falling in love with him. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like waking up after a long sleep. One evening in late September, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air had begun to cool with the changing season, and Zelda had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Zane sat beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I have been thinking," he said quietly. "You have been here 6 weeks now. You have earned wages, more than enough to go wherever you want. But you have not mentioned leaving." Zelda's heart began to beat faster. "No," she agreed, "I have not." "Is that because you are afraid to bring it up? Because if you want to go, I will take you just like I promised. I will not hold you here." She turned to look at him, at his profile against the sunset, the strong line of his jaw, the worried furrow between his brows. "What if I do not want to go?" He turned to meet her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. Then I would ask you why. I would want to make sure you are staying because you want to, not because you feel obligated or because you do not think you have other options. I am staying because I want to, she said firmly, because I am happy here, because you make me happy. She watched his throat work as he swallowed. Zelda, I need to be honest with you about something. My feelings for you are not just friendly anymore. They have not been for a while. Every morning I wake up looking forward to seeing you. Every evening I sit out here with you and think about how right it feels. But I do not want to take advantage of the situation. I know you are here because I bought your freedom, and I do not ever want you to think that there are strings attached to that you owe me anything. You did not buy my freedom, Zelda corrected softly. You gave it to me. There is a difference. She reached out and took his hand, feeling her own trembling slightly. And I do not feel obligated to you. I feel grateful, yes. But more than that, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for. I feel like I have found home. Zelda. Her name was a whisper, a prayer. He lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles. I am falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you on that auction block. So scared, but so brave. Tell me if this is too much, too fast. Tell me if you need me to step back. Do not step back, she said. Please do not step back. He released her hand only to cup her face instead, his calloused palms gentle against her cheeks. Can I kiss you? Yes, she breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind to pull away. But she did not want to pull away. She wanted him, with an intensity that surprised her. When his lips finally met hers, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. She kissed him back, pouring all of her hope and fear and longing into it, and felt him respond in kind. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. I want to court you properly. I want everyone to know that you are not my housekeeper. You are the woman I love. Then court me, she said with a smile. Though I think you have been courting me all along, he laughed, the sound joyful and free. I suppose I have been at that. After that night, everything shifted and yet stayed the same. They still had their meals together, still sat on the porch in the evenings, still worked side by side during the day. But now there were stolen kisses in the kitchen, hands held under the table, long conversations that stretched late into the night where they shared their deepest hopes and fears. Zane took her to a dance in town, and she wore one of her new dresses, the blue one that brought out the color of her eyes. They twirled around the floor of the community hall, and she did not care that people were watching, whispering about the woman who had been auctioned and the cowboy who had bought her. Let them talk. She knew the truth. She knew what they had. In October, Zane took her to meet his nearest neighbors, the Thornton family who lived about 5 miles south. They were a kind couple with 3 children, and they welcomed Zelda warmly. The wife, Margaret, pulled her aside at one point and said, "We have known Zane for 3 years now, and we have never seen him happy until today. Whatever you have done, whatever you are to him, it is good." In November, the first winter rains came, turning the Golden Hills green almost overnight. They spent more time inside, and Zelda read aloud to Zane in the evenings while he carved wood by the fire, making fence posts and small decorative pieces. She loved the domesticity of it, the quiet intimacy. One night, as she finished a chapter and closed the book, he set aside his knife and wood and looked at her seriously. "Marry me," he said. She blinked, not sure she had heard correctly. "What? Marry me?" he repeated. "I know it has only been a few months. I know by all conventional wisdom we should wait longer. But I am 30 years old, Zelda, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I do not want to wait to start our life together. We are already living it. I just want to make it official. I want you to be my wife." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course I will marry you." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left them both shaking. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," he said, slipping it onto her finger. "The only thing of hers I kept when I left Texas. I have been carrying it around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment to ask." She looked at the ring through her tears, then up at him. "It is perfect. You are perfect." They were married in December in the small church in Stockton, with the Thornton family as witnesses and a handful of other friends they had made. Zelda wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Margaret had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Zane had picked that morning despite the cold. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Zane kissed her in front of everyone, she felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The winter passed in a haze of newlywed bliss. They grew together in every way, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal tenderness. Zelda had worried that intimacy might be frightening, but with Zane it was only beautiful. He was patient and gentle and made her feel cherished in every moment. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle had calves, the horses had foals, and the hills were carpeted with wildflowers. And in May, Zelda realized that she too was carrying new life. She told Zane over breakfast, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. He dropped his fork with a clatter and stared at her. "Truly, truly," she confirmed, laughing at his expression. "I think it will be January, maybe February." He came around the table and pulled her to her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down and dropping to his knees to press his face against her still flat belly. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father speaking. I cannot wait to meet you." Zelda ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love. This man who had saved her, who had given her freedom and then given her his heart, was going to be the father of her child. Life, she thought, had a strange way of working out. The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda suffered from terrible nausea in the first months, and later her back ached constantly from the growing weight. But Zane was there through all of it, rubbing her feet in the evenings, taking over more of the household chores, treating her like she was made of glass. "I am not fragile," she protested one day when he insisted she sit down while he finished the laundry. "I know you are not fragile," he replied. "You are the strongest person I know, but you are carrying our child and I want to help however I can. Let me do this for you." She relented, because arguing with him when he was being sweet was impossible. Their son was born on a frigid night in late January 1884, with Margaret Thornton serving as midwife and Zane pacing outside the bedroom door. It was a long labor, painful and exhausting, but when Zelda finally held the squirming, red-faced baby in her arms, she forgot all of it. Zane came in as soon as Margaret allowed it, and the look on his face when he saw his son for the first time was something she would remember forever. "He is perfect," Zane whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The baby gripped it immediately, and Zane's eyes filled with tears. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Jesse after Zane's father, and he became the center of their world. Zane was a devoted father, taking Jesse with him on the ranch as soon as the baby was old enough, teaching him about horses and cattle and the land. Zelda watched them together and felt her heart overflow. When Jesse was 2, Zelda became pregnant again. This time she hoped for a girl, someone to balance out their little family. But when the baby came in the spring of 1886, it was another boy. They named him Thomas, and he had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. The years flowed by like water. each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The ranch prospered under Zane's careful management. They expanded the herd, built a larger barn, hired on 2 permanent ranch hands to help with the work. Zelda's herb garden grew into a full vegetable garden, and she learned to preserve food for the winter months. She taught both boys to read before they were old enough for school, passing on her love of books and learning. Jesse grew into a serious, thoughtful child who loved animals and could spend hours watching the horses. Thomas was wilder, always climbing trees and getting into mischief, but with a smile that could charm anyone. Watching them grow, Zelda sometimes thought back to that day on the auction block, to how terrified and hopeless she had felt. She could never have imagined this life, this abundance of love and happiness. One evening when the boys were 5 and 3, after they had been tucked into bed in the room Zane had built for them, Zelda and Zane sat on their porch as they had done so many evenings before. The stars were bright overhead, and the air smelled of hay and earth and home. "You ever regret it?" Zelda asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Spending all that money on me, giving up your quiet bachelor life." He wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "Every single day I wake up and think about how I spent $500 and got back everything that matters. You, our boys, this life we have built together. It was the best investment I ever made." She smiled against his chest. "I love you, Zane Irons." "I love you too, Zelda Irons, more than I can ever find words to say." They sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through the grass. This, Zelda thought, was what freedom really meant. Not just the burning of a contract, though that had been important. Real freedom was having the choice to build a life with someone who valued you, who saw you as an equal partner, who loved you not despite your past, but as a whole person with both strengths and scars. In 1889, Zelda finally had her daughter. They named her Clara, and she came into the world with a lusty cry and a head full of blonde curls. Jesse and Thomas were enchanted with their baby sister, always wanting to hold her, to help feed her, to show her off to anyone who visited the ranch. Zane was completely smitten, carrying Clara everywhere once she was big enough, teaching her the names of all the horses, picking wildflowers for her chubby fists. "We have completed our family," Zane said one night, watching Zelda nurse the baby. "3 healthy children, a prosperous ranch, and the love of my life. I could not ask for more." But life had one more gift for them. In the summer of 1890, a young woman arrived at their door. She was thin and scared, carrying a small bundle of belongings, and she explained that she had heard about Zelda's story, about how Zelda had been saved from a labor auction. The woman's name was Sarah, and she was running from an abusive marriage. She had nowhere else to go. Zelda did not even have to discuss it with Zane. She knew what his answer would be. They took Sarah in, gave her a safe place to stay, helped her find work in town once she was ready. Over the years, other women came, each with their own story of hardship or danger. The Irons Ranch became known as a place where women could find help, could find refuge, could find a new start. It was not always easy. Some people in town disapproved, saying that Zelda was interfering in other people's marriages or encouraging women to be disobedient. But Zelda did not care. She knew what it was like to feel helpless and trapped. If she could offer someone else the kind of help that Zane had offered her, she would do it without hesitation. Zane supported her completely in this work. He helped build small cabins on the edge of their property where women could stay until they got back on their feet. He used his connections in town to help them find jobs and places to live. He taught Zelda everything he knew about managing money and property, so that she could teach these skills to others. Together, they became a team not just in their marriage and their family, but in their commitment to helping those who needed it most. The years continued their steady march. Jesse grew into a young man who decided he wanted to study veterinary medicine, following his love of animals into a career. With his parents' support, he went to school in San Francisco, coming home during breaks with books and stories about city life. Thomas took to ranching like he was born to it, learning everything he could from his father, already talking about the day when he might have a spread of his own. Clara proved to be whip-smart and headstrong, determined to go to college and become a teacher, just like her mother had once dreamed of being. In the spring of 1899, on a warm afternoon much like the one when they had first met, Zelda and Zane stood together at the corral, watching Thomas work with a young horse. They were in their 40s now, with silver threading through Zane's dark hair and laugh lines around Zelda's eyes. But the love between them had not dimmed with time. If anything, it had deepened, become richer and more complex, like a wine that improves with age. 17 years, Zane said, slipping his hand into hers. 17 years since I saw you on that auction block and knew I had to do something. Best $500 you ever spent, Zelda teased, echoing the joke they had made many times over the years. The best, he agreed. Then he turned to face her, his expression serious. Zelda, I want you to know something. I want you to know that every day with you has been a gift. Every morning I wake up grateful. Every night I go to sleep thankful. You took a chance on a stranger and you gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You gave me love and family and purpose. You made me a better man. Tears filled her eyes, but they were happy tears. You saved my life, Zane. But more than that, you gave me a reason to live it. You gave me freedom and then you gave me a choice and I chose you. I will always choose you. He kissed her then, there in the afternoon sunshine with their son working nearby and the land they loved stretching out around them. It was not their first kiss or their 100th or their 1000th. But it was perfect in the way that kisses are when they are built on years of shared history and weathered storms and quiet moments of joy. As the 20th century turned, the Irons family continued to thrive. Their ranch was now one of the most respected in the Sacramento Valley, known not just for quality cattle and horses, but for the integrity of the people who ran it. Jesse finished his studies and opened a veterinary practice in Stockton, still coming home every weekend to help on the ranch. Thomas married a kind woman from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the Irons property, planning to take over more of the operations as Zane began to slow down with age. Clara went to normal school in Sacramento and came home summers full of passion for education reform and women's rights, organizing programs for the children of ranch workers and making her parents proud with her fierce dedication to helping others. The small refuge that Zelda and Zane had created grew into something more formal. They partnered with churches and charitable organizations to create a more structured program for women escaping difficult situations. Zelda, drawing on her own experience and natural compassion, became known throughout the region as someone who could help women navigate the complex legal and social challenges of leaving bad situations and starting over. She corresponded with reformers in San Francisco and Sacramento, adding her voice to the growing movement for women's rights and protections. In 1905, on their 22nd wedding anniversary, Zane took Zelda back to Stockton. They walked through the square where the auction block had once stood. It was gone now, torn down years ago, replaced by a flower garden and a fountain. They stood there hand in hand, remembering that day, that moment when their lives had intersected and changed forever. I was so scared, Zelda said softly, looking at the spot where the platform had been. "I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything." "You were so brave," Zane replied. "Standing up there with your chin high, refusing to be broken. That was when I knew. That was when I knew you were extraordinary." She turned to him with a smile. "You were the extraordinary one. You saw someone in trouble and you helped, no questions asked, no expectations. Do you know how rare that is?" "I just did what felt right," he said. "What felt necessary. I could not walk away from you. I did not want to walk away from you." They returned to the ranch as the sun set, driving the wagon Zane had taught Zelda to handle years ago, with Ruby and Daisy long since retired to peaceful old age in the pasture, and new horses pulling them home. The house they approached was the same house they had lived in all those years, though it had been expanded and improved over time. Lights glowed in the windows, and Zelda knew that Thomas and his wife had prepared dinner for them, that their grandchildren would be waiting to hug them and hear stories. This was what that $500 had bought. Not a cook for a logging camp. Not 3 years of labor. But a lifetime of love. A family. A home. A legacy of kindness that would ripple outward long after they were gone. That night, lying in bed with Zane's arms around her, Zelda thought about the young woman she had been, terrified on an auction block. If she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, she would say this: "Hold on. Be brave just a little bit longer. The man who will love you is in the crowd. He is about to change your life. He is about to save you and then show you that you can save yourself. And together, you will build something beautiful." The years rolled on, bringing grandchildren and then great-grandchildren. Zelda and Zane grew old together, their hands wrinkled but still clasped, their hair silver but their love still bright. They sat on their porch in the evenings and watched the sun set over the land they had worked and the life they had built, and they were content. When Zane passed in the winter of 1920, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 70, Zelda mourned him with a grief that was fierce and deep. But it was not a despairing grief. It was the grief of someone who had been truly blessed, who had known real love, who had no regrets. She had had 40 years with him, 40 years of partnership and passion and quiet joy. It was more than many people got. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for that day on the auction block. She lived another 6 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged, still helping women who needed it, still telling the story of how a cowboy had bought her contract and burned it, giving her freedom and then giving her love. She told the story not as a fairy tale, but as truth, as a reminder of what human kindness could accomplish, of how one act of courage and compassion could change multiple lives. When she died in 1926 at the age of 66, she was buried next to Zane on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath an oak tree they had planted together on their first anniversary. Her children inscribed her headstone with the words she had chosen herself. She was bought with love and lived in freedom. And the ranch continued, passed down through the generations. Each one told the story of how it had all begun. How a young woman had been saved from an auction block by a cowboy who saw her not as property but as a person. How he had burned her contract and offered her a choice. How she had chosen him, and how together they had built a life that honored freedom, kindness, and love. The small cabins that Zelda and Zane had built for women in need became a permanent refuge, expanded and formalized, operating for decades as a safe house. The programs Zelda had started continued, grew, touched thousands of lives, and always the story was told. The story of Zelda Kincaid, who became Zelda Irons, and the cowboy who loved her. It was a story of its time, marked by the struggles and injustices of the Wild West, when women had few rights and desperation could lead to situations like labor auctions. But it was also a timeless story, a story about recognizing the humanity in others, about having the courage to act when you see injustice, about how love can grow in unexpected places and transform everything it touches. Years turned into decades, and decades into a century. The ranch remained in the family, a testament to what Zelda and Zane had built. And on warm spring evenings, when the sunset painted the California hills in shades of gold and amber, family members would sit on that same porch and tell the story again. The story of how it all began. The story of an auction, a burning contract, and a love that changed everything.